Welcome to the deep dive. We all picture that Kiwi dream, right? A house, the backyard, maybe even a pool. Sounds like bliss.
It does. Pure relaxation, family fun.
But yeah, with that dream, especially the pool part, comes a really big responsibility. We're talking about keeping kids safe around water.
Absolutely. And the stats, they're pretty sobering. When you look back, say, at data from 94 to 2003 in New Zealand, something like 75% of drownings for kids under 4, it was put down to lack of proper adult supervision.
75%, that's huge. And while we automatically think pool fence is the barrier.
Yeah, the classic four-sided fence.
Right. But often the house itself is part of that barrier. Doors, windows opening straight onto the pool area.
And that's where things get tricky, especially now. You've got these modern homes, big open plan spaces, that whole indoor-outdoor flow everyone loves.
Which often means large glass doors right by the pool.
Exactly. So trying to make those doors meet really strict safety rules while still having the lifestyle people want, it's actually become surprisingly complicated.
It's a real balancing act, isn't it? Lifestyle versus, well, literally life-saving rules.
It really is, and that's what we're diving into today. We're looking specifically at how pool safety regulations here in New Zealand have changed over time.
Wow.
And crucially, how the building codes and the way local councils interpret those codes have sort of interacted with companies trying to come up with new safety tech. We'll be tracing a lot of this through the experiences of one company in particular, Swish Automation Ltd., based on the documents we've seen.
Right. And our source stack for this gives us a pretty unique view, doesn't it? We've sifted through a whole load of documents.
Yeah, quite a mix.
Council requests for information, RFIs, detailed technical statements, internal memos, emails flying back and forth with government departments, even promotional stuff.
And it covers a fair bit of time, too, right back from 2010 up to documents from early 2025.
So it's not just looking at the rules in theory. It's seeing how they've been applied, argued over, on the ground for over a decade.
Precisely. So, our mission today, take this pile of material, pull out the key insights for you. We want to trace that history, where the rules came from, what challenges companies like Swish actually faced trying to offer safety solutions.
And explore that tension you mentioned.
Exactly. That push and pull between, very specific prescriptive rules like your fence must be exactly like this and a more performance-based approach.
The kind that says, okay, the goal is stopping unsupervised kids getting to the pool. Show us your solution achieves that safety outcome.
That's the one. All with the same ultimate goal, of course, keeping kids safe. We're hoping to give you a clearer picture of this whole, sometimes quite complex landscape.
Okay, sounds good. Let's start at the beginning then. Set the scene. How did we handle pool safety originally? We need to talk about FOSPA, right?
Yep, the Fencing of Swimming Pools Act, 1987. FOSPA, that was the bedrock legislation for residential pools for a long time in New Zealand.
And its main goal was pretty clear.
Crystal clear and absolutely critical. Cut down the number of children drowning in home swimming pools. Simple as that.
And under FOSPA, what if the house itself was part of the pool fence, so to speak?
Right. If the building formed part of the barrier, then any doors leading directly from inside the house out to the pool area had to meet some very specific safety standards.
Which were?
The key thing was those doors had to be self-closing and self-latching from any position they were open to. The idea was to make sure a young child couldn't just wander out of the house unsupervised and end up in the pool area.
Okay, self-closing, self-latching. Makes sense. But the sources we looked at suggest there was a bit of a practical issue with that requirement, leading up to around 2005.
Yeah, that's a key point. The law said the doors had to do this act as a functional barrier, but finding reliable, dedicated safety devices specifically designed for residential doors, your standard sliding door or hinge door, to make them self-close and self-latch effectively. No, they just weren't really available off the shelf.
So the law was there. Homeowners needed to comply, councils needed to enforce it, but the actual tech to make it happen easily for a typical house door was missing.
Pretty much. Modifying standard doors, sliders, bifolds, French doors to meet that FOSPA standard in a way that was robust and reliable for a home setting. It was a gap in the market, a real gap between the rule and the practical reality for doors used as barriers.
And this is where Swish Automation comes into the picture, according to the documents.
Exactly. The sources say they formed the company in 2005 specifically because they saw this demand. It was coming from the territorial authorities, the councils, who needed ways for homeowners to make their doors compliant with FOSPA.
So their initial goal was quite targeted.
Very. Provide a reliable method to modify standard residential door sets so they'd prevent unsupervised exit by young kids into the pool area. And back then, under FOSPAY, the age focus was children aged 6 and under.
Okay. And they weren't just aiming for something basic that ticked the box. The sources mentioned specific design goals.
Yeah, they had clear criteria right from the start. Performance was key. The systems had to work reliably every single time. Durability, obviously crucial, especially poolside.
Right, chlorine, weather.
So they used things like marine grade, stainless steel, aluminum alloys, stuff built to last. Aesthetics mattered too. People don't want ugly contraptions on their nice doors, so integration was important.
Making it look like part of the door, not an add-on.
Sort of, yeah. And flexibility, it had to work with all sorts of different door types and sizes. And importantly, for child resistance, they actually looked at standards similar to fire doors.
Fire doors, why?
Well, fire doors are designed to be difficult for young children to open or tamper with. So Swish adopted similar principles to make sure their systems couldn't be easily defeated by a curious kid.
Interesting. So robust, good-looking, flexible, and genuinely child-resistant, drawing on fire safety standards. That's quite a brief.
It is. And their safety focus wasn't just the hardware. We found evidence of that collaboration back in November 2010. Swish worked with WaterSafe Auckland on a public information thing, didn't they?
Yeah, the pool safety supervision brochure. That stood out.
It did, because it shows their approach was broader than just selling their product. That brochure hammered home the message about active parental supervision around all water hazards, actually, not just pools.
And they used those stark stats we mentioned earlier, 75% of underfoot drownings back then linked to lack of supervision.
Exactly. It was making the point that barriers are crucial, but they're not a substitute for watching kids closely. It's about the human element, too.
And the brochure wasn't just talk, it had practical tools.
Yeah, checklists, guides, definitions of supervision, even CPR instructions, contact info for WaterSafe and councils. Swish's stated aim was promoting practical, real-world safety solutions, making this info widely available. It paints a picture, according to their docs, of a company committed to safety beyond just their own tech.
Okay, so they're developing the tech, promoting supervision. Fast forward a bit to August 2015. The documents show they're talking to the government.
Yeah, engaging with MBIE, the Ministry of Business, Innovation, and Employment. They were sending MBIE data sheets on their systems, sharing these newsletters they published called Open and Shut Cases.
Catchy name.
Yeah. Discussing market challenges, their development work. They were clearly in the trenches, working with councils day to day, trying to get approvals, dealing with compliance hurdles.
And even before the big law change, they were already installing systems and involved in formal processes under FOSPA.
That's right. They'd installed quite a few systems by then and had participated in what were called exemption hearings under FOSPA. Sometimes these hearings involved looking at alternative ways to comply, and that's where that standard NZS 8500-2006 sometimes came up.
NZS 8500. You mentioned that would be important.
Yes, it's a key piece of the puzzle, especially as we move into the next big regulatory shift.
Right, which happened when? Residential pool safety moved away from the standalone FOSPA Act.
And came under the umbrella of the Maine Building Act 2004. Specifically, Building Code Clause F9. This change kicked in officially in January 2017.
And the government's stated reasons for this change were?
Well, according to the official line at the time, it was meant to be an improvement. The goals were things like making pool safety compliance easier for homeowners, reducing the costs involved for them, and also cutting down on admin costs for the councils doing the enforcing.
Easier and cheaper. Sounds good. Any safety goals?
Yes, absolutely. There was a specific projection that this change would help reduce home pool drownings by about 6 children over the next 10 years. So simpler, cheaper, and safer was the plan.
Okay, that was the intention. What did the actual rules, the core requirements under this new clause F9 say? What did people now have to do?
Based on the sources detailing F9, the main performance requirement, F9.2, states that residential pools need a means of restricting access, and the target group is clearly defined, preventing unsupervised entry by children aged 5 years and under.
Okay, so note the age change there. Down from 6 under FOSP to 5 under F9. That's a key detail.
It is. It subtly shifts the focus.
What about the physical barrier itself?
Well, F9.3.1 still requires a physical barrier. Then F9.3.4 gets specific about when a building, like the house, forms part of that barrier. Any doors between the building and the pool area have to meet two key conditions.
Okay, what are they?
First, door must not be readily opened by children. A 5-year-old shouldn't be able to just walk up and open it easily.
Right, child resistant.
And second, the door must do one of two things. Either it has to give an audible warning, like an alarm, if it's left open,
Beep, beep, beep.
pretty much, or it has to close automatically and securely latch itself after someone uses it.
Ah, so the self-closing, self-latching idea carried over from FOSPO, but now there's also an alarm option as an alternative.
Exactly. Two distinct pathways for a door barrier, alarm or auto-close latch. Gives a bit more flexibility, on paper at least.
And the sources mention specific documents that councils could use to check compliance under F9.
Yes, there are key reference documents cited. One is NZS 8500-2006, that same standard we mentioned. Under the new system, it's explicitly cited in relation to the Building Act and F9. It's described as providing approved alternative solutions.
Okay, so NCS 8500 offers recognized ways to comply that aren't the standard path, like alternative methods.
That's how it's framed. Sources like official MBIE determinations, like one from 2017, actually reference specific clauses within NZS 8500 as acceptable ways to meet F9. It carries forward a pathway for solutions that might have been developed or approved under the old system.
Interesting. What about AS1 and AS2? Those names pop up a lot in the conflict narrative.
They do. Schedules AS1 and AS2 are also published under F9. They're known as acceptable solutions. Think of AS1 like a pre-approved recipe from the building code cookbook.
Follow it exactly, step by step.
And your building work is deemed to comply. It's meant to be straightforward. However, and this is critical, the point that Swish emphasizes repeatedly in their documents, and it's even acknowledged sometimes in official comms, is that AS1 and AS2 are non-mandatory.
Non-mandatory. Meaning
They're described as just one way to meet the regulation NZBC F9. You can follow the AS1 recipe, but you don't have to. Other recipes, like those based on NCS 8500 or verified against the F9 performance rules directly, are also allowed under the Building Act.
just one way. Okay, I can see how that phrase could cause arguments later if some people start treating it as the only way. How did Swish, based on their documents, view this new regulatory setup overall?
From Swish's perspective, as laid out in their letters and submissions, the main practical changes were that drop in the child age from 6 to 5 and the formal citing of NZS 8500-2006 within the code framework. Their consistent position was that the Building Act clearly allows multiple paths to compliance. You could follow the acceptable solution, AS1, AS2, fine. Or you could use the verification method, basically, proving through testing or calculation that your specific design meets the performance requirements of F9. Or you could use the solutions outlined in the cited document, NZS 8500-2006, which they viewed as proven alternative solutions. They saw all these routes as equally valid under the law for satisfying NZBC F9.
So the law change, in theory, provided options, a standard path, AS1, or these alternative verified paths. But as you said, the documents show this didn't necessarily make things simpler. It actually led to quite a bit of friction.
Yeah, that's where it gets messy. The core conflict, documented again and again in Swish's correspondence, seems to come down to how these new rules were interpreted and applied by different councils. Auckland Council comes up frequently in the documents, but others too, like Tauranga City Council later on.
And Swish's view was that councils weren't sticking to the law.
According to Swish, yes. They argued some councils started relying heavily on, and these are their words, opinion, myth, and interpretation, especially around that AS1 schedule. They felt councils weren't strictly following the actual requirements of the Building Act and NZBC F9 itself, but were getting fixated on AS1.
Opinion, myth, and interpretation. That's strong language about how official bodies are applying regulations. What was the specific beef with AS1, according to Swish?
Their fundamental argument, which they make repeatedly, is that since AS1 is officially designated as non-mandatory, councils cannot legally enforce it as if it's the only way to comply. The Building Act specifically allows for alternative solutions, provided they meet the performance requirements of F9.
So AS1 is a guideline, not a commandment.
That's Swish's position. They even claim in their documents that MBIE itself has advised building consent authorities, BCAs, the council departments handling consents that AS1 isn't mandatory. But, according to Swish, some councils just ignored this advice and kept treating AS1 as the benchmark, effectively shutting down or making it very difficult for alternative solutions to get approved.
So a helpful guide potentially being misused as a rigid rulebook, blocking other valid approaches.
That's the scenario Swish paints. And this really came to a head, apparently, when dealing with those big, modern, multi-leaf stacker slider
Ah,
doors.
yeah, the ones that open up entire walls.
Yeah.
Very popular for that indoor-outdoor living, especially near pools.
Exactly. The documents highlight specific battles over these types of doors, mentioning projects like one involving a door designated D005 as an example of where the conflict became very concrete.
So why did these popular doors become such a sticking point for pool safety compliance? What was the council's worry based on what we've read?
Well, looking at the council perspective, presented in documents like that February 2025 RFI from Tauranga, and referenced in earlier Auckland Council RFIs and discussions around a specific MBIE determination from 2019, the main concern seems to be about the intended use of those doors.
Intended use, meaning.
Councils argued that, look, the whole point of a big stacker door is usually to leave it wide open for long periods, right? To create that seamless flow between inside and outside.
Yeah, that's why people install them.
Right. So councils felt this common intended way of using the door was, in their words, clearly at odds with the main goal of F9, which is to restrict access to the pool. Their worry was that any system designed to automatically close such a large door might be seen by the homeowner as annoying, interfering with their lifestyle.
And therefore, they might disable it.
Precisely. That was the fear, that the system, even if technically compliant when installed, wouldn't be reliable in the long run because homeowners would likely disable or remove it due to perceived loss of amenity or just because it might be easy to do so. They pointed to notes within the AS1 schedule itself, which talk about doors providing access needing to remain effective except when briefly used, as evidence that the rules intended to minimize the time any barrier door is open. Their focus seemed to lean towards inherent design features over systems that rely on homeowner cooperation.
Okay, so the concern wasn't necessarily, can Swish's system make this door close automatically? But more, will the homeowner let it keep working because it potentially clashes with how they want to use that big opening?
That seems to be the core of the council argument presented in the sources. It's based on predicting future homeowner behavior, the likelihood of misuse.
And Swish's response to that?
Their counter-argument, laid out across numerous documents, was really focused on the letter of the law. They argued forcefully that there's nothing in the Building Act or NZBC F9 that puts any restriction on the size or the type or configuration of a door that can be used as part of a pool barrier as long as it meets the performance requirements, i.e. it's not readily opened by a child and it either alarms or self-close latches.
So size doesn't matter, legally speaking.
Not according to Swish's reading of the legislation. They totally rejected the idea that the intended use of a door for indoor-outdoor flow makes it incompatible with being a safety barrier. Their point was, the system's job is to restrict unsupervised access by young kids when that barrier function is needed. That is, whenever there isn't direct adult supervision.
That's a fundamental difference in focus, isn't it? One side looking at how the door is usually used, the other at whether the safety system works when it needs to.
Absolutely. Now, Swish did acknowledge that, yes, if a homeowner illegally disabled their system, then obviously the door wouldn't be compliant anymore under the close automatically option. But they strongly objected to councils rejecting consent applications based purely on the possibility or perceived likelihood that this might happen in the future. They described this reasoning as being based on, again, their words, unqualified, ignorant, and factually unsupported opinion and interpretation, not on any actual failure to meet the legal code requirements.
Unqualified, ignorant, and factually unsupported opinion. Wow, that really shows the frustration level in their communications. What specific legal arguments did they use to back this up?
They kept coming back to the Building Act itself. In their letters to councils and MBIE dating back years, they repeatedly challenged them. Show us the specific clause in the legislation or the regulations that our systems or the modified doors actually breach. They cited sections 18 and 19 of the Building Act 2004.
And what do those sections say, roughly?
Essentially, they establish how compliance with the building code is determined. Section 18 says building work complies if it meets the performance requirements. Section 19 basically says that if the work does comply with the code, you can't be forced to do more than what the code requires, or take on additional work just to exceed it.
So if it meets the standard, it meets the standard, end of story.
That was Swish's legal standpoint. Their argument was that a council's opinion about potential future behavior, or an interpretation based on a non-mandatory guideline like AS1, isn't a valid legal reason to reject a solution if that solution demonstrably meets the performance requirements set out in F9. Opinion isn't law was their constant refrain.
That's a very clear line they drew. And they also brought up the topic of homeowner responsibility, didn't they?
Yes, and this ties directly into their argument against councils basing decisions on potential misuse. Swish pointed to Section 162C4 of the Building Act 2004.
What does that section cover?
It explicitly states that the homeowner has the responsibility for maintaining the pool barrier and ensuring it continues to comply with the safety requirements. The onus is on the owner to keep it working correctly.
Okay.
Swish used an analogy that compared it to a car manufacturer. Ford or Toyota isn't held responsible if someone buys their car and then decides to speed, right? The responsibility for driving legally lies with the driver.
Makes sense.
So, Swish argued, similarly, they provide a system that makes a door compliant with F9. The responsibility for ensuring that system stays operational and isn't illegally disabled rests solely with the homeowner, as defined in the Act. They felt that counsel suggesting homeowners who wanted these systems were somehow inherently irresponsible or likely to break the law was completely out of line and infringed on the owner's statutory rights and responsibilities.
That's a powerful analogy. It frames it as an issue of user behavior and enforcement, not a fundamental flaw in the technology allowing the behavior. Now, there's also frequent mention in the sources of Determination 2019-001. What role did that play?
Yes. Determination 2019-001. That appears to be a major bone of contention based on Swish's documents. A determination is like an official ruling from MBIE on a specific compliance dispute.
Okay.
According to Swish's records, this particular determination was related to a specific site, a specific project. Their issue was that they felt councils were wrongly treating the site-specific ruling as if it set a general precedent that applied to other projects, including theirs.
They felt it was being misapplied.
And they also fundamentally disputed the ruling itself. Swish alleges in their documents that the determination remains in dispute and claims it was based on what they term fraudulent reports submitted by council employees, reports they say were not backed up by any actual drowning statistics related to such systems.
Strong claims.
Yeah.
Did they challenge this?
They say they did. Swish claims they presented counter-evidence to MBI during that process, things like the drown base, NZ stats, coronal reports covering a decade from 2005, but that this evidence was ignored. They also allege that when they later complained about the process, MBIE told them their complaints weren't accepted because Swish was a manufacturer, apparently without giving clear legislative reasons for the decisions made within the determination itself.
So from Swish's viewpoint, a flawed site-specific ruling was being used against them broadly, and their attempts to correct the record were rebuffed.
That's the narrative presented in their documentation, and here's an ironic twist they point out. Swish's documents state that Determination 2019-001 itself, the very ruling they contested, but which councils sometimes cited, actually acknowledged that using AS1 is not mandatory.
Seriously.
According to Swish's reading cited in the sources, yes. The determination apparently stated that an alternative solution can and should be considered if it meets the F9 performance requirements, which seems to directly contradict the very practice Swish was objecting to councils rigidly insisting on AS1.
Wow. It sounds like even the official dispute resolution process became part of the problem, creating more confusion rather than less.
It certainly appears that way from the perspective laid out in these documents.
Okay, let's bring this right up to date. That February 2025 request for information from Tauranga City Council, how does that show these issues are still playing out?
Well, that RFI is a really concrete recent snapshot. It shows that this core conflict, especially around those big stacker doors and alternative solutions, is still very much alive and causing headaches years after the F9 rules came in.
What kind of things was the RFI asking about?
It covered a range of typical compliance details for a specific project. Questions about anti-climb products on fences, checking if a nearby spa pool could be used as a climbing point onto the barrier, details on barrier extensions, the specific type and height of gate hardware to make sure little hands can't reach it, checking gaps under fences meet the rules in AS1 Figure 3, standard stuff.
Right, the detailed checks you'd expect.
Yeah.
But it specifically brought up the stacker door issue again, the one labeled D005.
Yes, explicitly. The RFI noted that the design amendment for the project had re-included those large stacker sliders opening into the pool area. And the council officer stated very bluntly something like, resubmitting the same information discussed previously has not addressed the issue. It even mentioned rejecting previous correspondence from the Swish advocate on this exact point as evidence of compliance.
So this wasn't the first time this specific door on this project had been debated. They were going around in circles.
Seems like it. It was clearly a persistent point of disagreement.
And what reason did the council officer give in that 2025 RFI for still rejecting the stacker door solution?
They basically reiterated the council's long-standing position. The officer wrote, "This approach is not accepted. The intent of the stacker slider is obvious and clearly at odds with the objective of Building Code Clause F9. They stated the proposal didn't comply with the specific clause in AS1 4.2.1 because it was a multi-leaf stacker, and flatly said the alternative solution is not accepted."
Same reasoning as before then. The intended use clashes with the barrier function.
Pretty much. The RFI repeated the core argument. The point of a stacker slider is that it is opened and left open for extended periods of time. This clear intended use is incompatible with its requirement to act as a pool barrier. And then, doubling down on the prediction of misuse. In its current design configuration, it's clear to me that the alarm, or presumably the autocloser, will likely be removed or disabled early on, therefore not protecting children from drowning.
There it is again. The assumption about homeowner behavior overriding the technical compliance of the system itself.
Exactly. The officer also mentioned discussing closer systems with colleagues who had apparently found issues with the system installed on multi-pane stackers not closing correctly, although no specific details of those issues were provided in the snippet we saw. And signaling a complete impasse on this point.
Yeah.
The officer concluded by saying they discussed it internally at Taranga City Council, TCC, and wouldn't be changing their assessment. They then suggested the only way forward if the owner wanted to keep those large stacker doors was to apply to MBIE for a formal determination to resolve the disagreement.
Back to suggesting an MBIE determination. So years on, the same fundamental disagreements persist, pushing things towards formal disputes. That 2025 RFI also asked for alarm specs and structural info.
Yes, requests for the specific alarm system specifications if that option was chosen, and also for structural engineering documentation, like a PS1 producer statement design, for the fences and gates to show they met the structural requirements, B1, B2, of the building code, just covering all bases.
Okay, so that RFI really encapsulates the ongoing detailed nature of these compliance battles and the persistence of these core interpretive disagreements. Let's maybe shift focus a bit now and look more closely at how Swish presents their approach from the client's perspective and the safety track record they keep highlighting.
Right. Well, the picture Swish paints in their documents is definitely one of being client-focused, trying to bridge that gap between safety regulations and how people actually want to live in their homes. They emphasize that their systems are designed to modify existing doors, not just new ones.
So you don't necessarily have to rip out your doors to make them compliant.
That's the idea. They talk about creating an invisible barrier, something integrated into the door you already have, rather than needing, say, another fence right up against the house wall, which can affect the look and feel.
Practicality and aesthetics again. Trying to make safety fit the home.
Seems to be the goal. Their documents list the systems they offer for standard sliding doors, for bifold doors that fold away, for regular hinged or French doors. And they have automated options too, like something called auto stack, presumably for those heavier multi-panel doors.
Okay.
Their stated aim is to give architects, builders, and homeowners a way to have those big, desirable openings for indoor-outdoor living, but also ensure those openings can reliably function as compliant pool barriers when needed, stopping unsupervised kids getting through. They position it as enabling both lifestyle and safety.
And the sources make it clear this wasn't easy. They had some serious technical hurdles to overcome, especially with modern doors getting bigger and heavier.
Oh, definitely. The documents detail some real engineering challenges. Designing systems that are robust enough for all sorts of door styles and sizes is one thing, but a huge factor they mention is the sheer weight of modern door panels, especially double-glazed sliders.
They've gotten much heavier over the years.
Significantly, according to Swish, they reckon since they started back in 2005, the average weight of a single sliding panel has roughly tripled, maybe from around 50 kilos up to modern panels hitting 160 kilograms or even more. They provide evidence of testing their system successfully on panels up to 140 kilograms for certain projects, which gives you an idea of the forces involved.
Wow. Getting a 140-kilogram panel of glass to close reliably and safely every time, that takes some doing.
It really does. And they acknowledge that their system's performance relies heavily on the door itself moving smoothly in the first place. The documents mention they recommend checking the door's basic slide performance before installation. Ideally, it shouldn't take more than about 3 kilograms of force, roughly 29 newtons, to get the panel moving.
So the door needs to be in good shape.
Yeah. They note that sometimes just cleaning the tracks and checking the wheel sets can make a huge difference, making the door efficient enough for the auto closer to work perfectly. For some installations, they might also specify limiting how far a panel can open, say to a maximum of 950 millimeter, just to keep it within the system's optimal operating parameters.
Okay, so it's a combination of their tech and ensuring the door itself is working properly. Now, how do they stop a clever 5-year-old from just reaching the handle and opening the door themselves, even if it self-closes?
That's addressed by their self-latch device. This is designed to be installed high up, typically on the door frame, at a minimum height of 1,500 millimeters, 1.5 meters from the floor inside.
High enough to be out of reach for young kids.
That's the specific intention, to prevent children from being able to operate the latch themselves and get out. And they offer different setups. You can have the self-latch and self-close mechanism, or you can add their door minder alarm for an audible warning if the door is left open, or sometimes a combination, tailoring it to the situation.
Right. So they've engineered solutions for the weight, the operation, the child access. How do they argue these systems should be approved under the Building Act? What's their compliance pathway?
They consistently emphasize their use of the verification method provided for in the Building Act. Their position is that their systems demonstrate compliance with the performance requirements of NCBC F9 by meeting the criteria laid out in that cited standard, NZS 8500-2006.
So they see NZS 8500 not just as some old document, but as the key.
Absolutely. They frame NZS 8500-2006 as providing documented, approved alternative solutions, methods that were developed, tested, and proven effective under the previous FOSPAV rules, and which are explicitly referenced within the new building code structure. They see this as a fully legitimate, robust way to show compliance and get cancel consent, a path that's distinct from, but just as valid as, following the non-mandatory AS1 schedule.
And they back this up with their history, right? What's the big claim they make about their track record?
This is probably their most powerful argument presented in the sources. Swish states they've installed over 5,000 of their systems on doors across New Zealand since they started back in April 2005.
5,000 systems. That's a lot of doors.
It is, and out of those, they claim over 4,000 modified doors have been formally approved by councils, both under the old FOSPAY rules and, since January 2017, under the current NZBC F9 regulations. But the crucial claim, the one they highlight repeatedly, is their 100% child safety record to date. Across roughly 18 years of operation and all those thousands of installations, they state they are unaware of any child drowning incidents involving pool access through a door fitted with a correctly installed and maintained Swish system.
Wow. A zero incident record over 18 years and 5,000 plus systems? That's a statistic that's hard to ignore in a safety debate.
It's certainly compelling, and they deliberately link this track record directly back to the law's objective. Their argument is, our systems are designed to effectively restrict unsupervised access by young children, under 5 now, under 6 previously, which is exactly what the regulation demands. And our 18-year incident-free history is real-world proof verification, if you like, that our approach, using methods recognized in NZS 8500, actually works and achieves that safety goal in practice, despite all the regulatory arguments they face.
They also use official drowning statistics more broadly, don't they, to provide context and counter some of the council concerns?
Yes, they do. Their submissions reference data from sources like DrownBase NZ and Coronial reports looking at periods like 2005 to 2015. They use this data to point out that under the old FOSPAS system, their solutions were developed and widely approved under using NZS 8500 drownings of children under 4 in home pools, averaged around 3 per year nationally.
3 per year. Still tragic, but maybe lower than people might think.
Well, they contrast it with the average number of drownings for the same age group in other water bodies, beaches, rivers, lakes, which they state was around 9 per year during that same period.
Okay, so based on that historical data, home pools under the old rules, while still needing barriers, were statistically less deadly for toddlers than other common water environments.
That's the argument Swish puts forward, that the old system, which allowed for their NZS 8500-based solutions, was actually quite effective in preventing drownings. They also express skepticism, based on their direct compliance experiences between 2017 and 2019, about whether the new Act's projected reduction in drownings, that target of 6 fewer over 10 years, was actually being achieved. In fact, in some documents, they voice a pretty strong concern. They worry that if councils focus too much on rigidly enforcing AS1, which they characterize as potentially reflecting failing Australian isolation fencing legislation, it might actually discourage the use of other proven effective methods like theirs, and could, counterintuitively, lead to an increase in child deaths.
That's a serious claim that enforcing one specific solution might make things less safe overall.
It underscores their conviction that their approach, rooted in NZS 8500, was best pool compliance practice during the FOSPAY years, specifically Jan 2007 to Section 2016 in one document, and remains a valid, effective, and demonstrably safe pathway today.
So they clearly see their solutions as proven by history, proven by data, and compliant with the law, and they're pushing hard for that to be recognized.
Absolutely. The documents show them engaged in pretty extensive advocacy work over the years, making submissions to Parliament's select committees when the laws were changing, sending detailed emails to government ministers and MBIE officials, laying out their concerns, highlighting their safety record.
And those detailed replies to council RFIs we talked about.
Exactly. Plus, creating comprehensive custom product technical statements, PTS documents, for every single project they're involved in, specifically demonstrating how the proposed solution meets the building code requirements for that particular house and door.
They're putting in the work to make their case.
They frame all these actions as advocating for pool safety solutions that are practical, effective, and legally sound. Solutions that work for homeowners, architects, and builders, but always with child safety backed by that verified performance and track record as the absolute #1 priority. They are clearly actively challenging what they perceive as systemic misinterpretations of the regulations that are blocking legitimate, safe alternatives.
And this whole situation, this regulatory friction, and the difficulty getting these alternative solutions approved, it obviously affects Swish as a company and homeowners wanting specific solutions. But the sources suggest there were broader ripples too, economic impacts.
Yes, Swish raised this point quite directly, particularly in communications back around 2015 when they were talking to politicians. They cited analysis, referencing Statistics NZ research, that linked the widespread confusion and the varying interpretation, myth, and opinion on pool regulations across different councils, with Auckland Council's approach noted as particularly influential to a noticeable downturn in the national home pool building market.
A downturn in people building pools. How significant did they estimate this impact was?
Their analysis suggested a drop of over 600 new home pool installations across the country per year. And when you factor in not just the pool itself, but all the associated building work, landscaping, decking, fencing, they estimated the total annual loss in works value could be as high as $100 million.
$100 million a year. That's a substantial chunk of economic activity potentially lost, and jobs too, presumably.
That was their argument. They presented it as a serious economic consequence stemming directly from the regulatory uncertainty and inconsistency, calling it just the tip of the compliance iceberg, potentially facing the wider building sector due to these kinds of issues.
So it underscores that this isn't just some niche technical debate. It has real financial consequences for an entire industry.
Absolutely. And the documents make it clear that this underlying struggle, the fight over interpretation, especially that core question of is AS1 mandatory or not, and do councils have to accept valid alternative solutions based on NZS 8500-2006. It didn't just go away after the new act came in. It has persisted for years.
As shown by councils in 2021, still using arguments from a disputed 2019 determination.
Exactly. And then that February 2025 RFI from Tauranga, still circling back to the exact same issues around stacker doors and alternative solutions, despite presumably years of back and forth on the topic. Swish's frustration really comes through in the documentation, especially regarding their claim that councils often reject their proposals without actually citing a specific, valid legislative breach.
Just relying on interpretation or likelihood of misuse.
And their frustration, also documented, with MBIE allegedly being unresponsive to their detailed challenges about past determinations and the inconsistent way AS1 was being enforced across the country.
So given this ongoing deadlock, what options does the system offer for actually resolving these kinds of fundamental disagreements? What pathways forward are mentioned or implied in the documents?
Well, the system does have mechanisms, in theory. One, as we saw Tauranga Council suggest for the stacker door issue in that 2025 RFI, is to apply for an MBIE determination.
The formal ruling process.
Right. The homeowner, or maybe the designer, can ask MBIE to make a binding decision on whether a specific building solution complies with the code. It's designed specifically to settle these kinds of disputes between applicants and councils.
But Swish seems skeptical about that route.
Based on their documented experiences and claims regarding Determination 2019-001, yes. They express significant concerns about the fairness, the basis, and the potential misapplication of past determinations involving their systems. So while it's an official pathway, its effectiveness in resolving the underlying issues seems questionable from their perspective.
Okay, so a formal MBIE ruling is one option, albeit one Swish views critically. Are there other potential solutions suggested?
Swish themselves propose a different route in their documents. They suggest actually modifying the acceptable solution, AS1.
Changing the guideline itself.
Yes, they argue AS1 should be updated. It should better reflect or incorporate what they call best pool compliance practice, meaning the kinds of effective solutions like those detailed in NZS 8500-2006 that were widely used, approved, and had that proven safety record under the FOSS-PAY system from, say, 2007 to 2016.
So make the official recipe book acknowledge and perhaps even include these other proven recipes instead of potentially excluding them.
That's the gist of it. Make the guideline reflect the reality of what works safely rather than being perceived as a narrow, restrictive path.
Interesting idea. Any other pathways?
Well, the third path isn't so much a formal process as a systemic improvement implied by the whole conflict. That would be achieving much greater clarity and, crucially, consistency in how the rules are applied by all councils across the country.
Getting everyone on the same page?
Ideally, yes. Guided by clear direction from MBIE. This would mean councils consistently recognizing and applying that fundamental principle of the Building Act. Compliance isn't only achieved through AS1. Valid alternative solutions, especially those properly verified against the F9 performance requirements and cited standards like NZS 8500-2006, must be assessed on their merits, their proven effectiveness, and their actual compliance with the law, not rejected based on subjective opinions about future misuse or rigid adherence to a non-mandatory schedule.
That sounds like it would cut through a lot of the current friction and delays if it could be achieved.
You'd think so. It would require a shift in approach from focusing solely on the acceptable solution pathway to embracing the performance-based nature of the building code more fully.
Okay, so through all this history, all of the technical details, all the regulatory arguments, what's the core message Swish seems to be trying to get across about what they do for their clients? What's their bottom line?
Their core message, repeated consistently throughout the documents we reviewed, is pretty straightforward. They state that their systems provide homeowners with a way to meet the legal requirements for pool safety. They do this by effectively and reliably restricting unsupervised access to the pool area for young children, aged 5 and under, which is precisely what the Building Act and Code F9 mandate.
And they do this using
Engineered solutions that they argue are validated by adhering to the principles and methods set out in the cited standard NZS 8500-2006 and by using the verification method allowed under the Building Act. And then they always circle back to that 18-year zero-incident safety record. They present that as the ultimate proof, the real-world verification that their approach works, is safe, and successfully meets the fundamental goal of the regulations protecting children, despite the significant regulatory battles and differing interpretations they consistently describe facing.
Right. So this deep dive has really traced that path, hasn't it? From the original FOSS-P 1987 through the big shift to the Building Act, the introduction of these key documents like NCS 8500 and AS1.
And it's really shown a light on how that change, which was intended to make things simpler, actually ended up creating quite complex and persistent challenges, especially for companies like Swish Automation trying to innovate and integrate modern design trends, like those big open doors, with the absolute necessity of pool safety. The documents certainly give a detailed account of their perspective on those challenges.
It absolutely highlights that core tension we talked about at the start, the tension between wanting clear, maybe easy-to-check prescriptive rules versus the flexibility that a performance-based system should offer, a system that should allow for alternative, innovative solutions.
Solutions like those offered by Swish, which they argue aren't just compliant on paper based on the law and cited standards, but are also demonstrably effective, backed by that long history of installations and, most critically, their claimed flawless child safety record over nearly 2 decades.
And at the end of the day, it all comes back to the reason these rules exist in the first place. Child safety, preventing those heartbreaking drowning statistics.
Exactly. And while the barriers to fences, the compliant doors, are absolutely crucial layers of protection, we can't forget what that 2010 brochure highlighted and what the statistics bear out. That constant, vigilant adult supervision is still the most vital safeguard of all when kids are around water.
Absolutely. So reflecting on this whole journey, The evolving rules, the tech solutions, the arguments over interpretation, the impact on industry, and that constant focus on keeping children safe. Maybe here's something for you, the listener, to think about. In trying to achieve the highest possible level of safety, how should our regulatory systems best handle innovation? Is an approach that's flexible, that focuses on verifying actual performance, relies on proven safety track records, and clearly defines homeowner responsibility for ongoing use? Is that ultimately more effective at achieving the safety goal? Especially compared to strictly enforcing potentially narrow or perhaps outdated prescriptive methods, particularly when new technologies offer different but seemingly effective and safe alternatives. What does it mean for future safety innovation in our homes when navigating the compliance process becomes this challenging? Something to mull over.